episode of the Ad Podcast. Happy Monday. We have an exciting guest for you guys today. Cindy Goodrich is an executive marketing leader, brand strategist, and the chief marketing officer at Empathy, a technology platform dedicated to supporting families through the emotional and logistical burden of loss, grief, and legacy planning. She holds a BS in Biomedical and Mechanical Engineering from Duke University and an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Goodrich brings over 2 decades of experience scaling global tech icons and high-growth scale-ups, having previously served as the chief marketing officer of BetterUp and the vice president of marketing at HubSpot and the head of business and brand communications at Google. She specializes in humanizing complex, emotionally charged, and highly sensitive industries at scale. Cindy, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me and for taking everybody through my bio. I'm like, wow, I've been waiting for a long time.
It's always fun when somebody brings it through memory lane and tries to condense it to a paragraph, right?
Yeah, amazing.
Awesome. Well, maybe you could give us a little bit of the backstory. So, we talked about the fact that you went to Duke for undergrad, but where did you grow up, and where did you grow up before you went to Duke?
Yeah. So originally, I'm actually from West Virginia. So it was a town that was like relatively small, and was kind of in one of those positions where I was like, there's a bigger world out there. It's ready to go to that bigger world. And so that's when I went to Duke. Yeah.
Amazing. And any other, we mentioned some great brands that you worked at over the years, and really just a really cool wealth of different experience, BetterUp in the mental health space, another probably close adjacency to what you guys are doing today. HubSpot, one of the global powerhouses in the CRM space, and really just ERP management or company B2B management of businesses, SMB all the way up to enterprise. And then obviously at Google. Anything else on your resume that we should highlight?
Yeah, so it's funny. As you mentioned, my undergrad was in engineering. And so I got into engineering because I actually wanted to go to medical school, and Duke had a really great pipeline from biomedical engineering into medical school. As I did that, though, I actually got to, I learned programming and was developing things and actually programmed like a pacemaker, right? And so I was like a little more technical. And so in that time, did what everybody did, and you went into consulting when you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do. And so in consulting, I would either be on strategy projects or as a strategy person, or I'd be a developer. And I actually worked on a project for Bose, which, headphones, but were really wave radios then. And they just were really starting to sell online. And so I got to work with the marketing team as they were actually building out the website and working through all of that. And I was helping actually build part of the front end and connecting to the back end of the website. And so in working with marketing and really seeing they have this deep understanding of, why people are buying, the consumer insight, what people need, to also then how you bring that out to the world. And I was like, that's interesting. That's actually what's really, really interesting to me. So with that, I was like, I need to do the career switch. And so I went to business school because that's what you do at the time. And while I was in business school, I actually had an internship at Barilla, the pasta company. And so basically an amazing group of CPG people, really an amazing place to just get in there, understand deeply, all of that traditional, what everyone thinks of when they think of consumer packaged goods. Also was bringing my own tech perspective to it as they were actually just starting to build out their website. It was a really interesting time. So stayed on at Barilla during the school year. I was in a full-time MBA program, worked for them full-time, not full-time, but a decent amount during that. So wasn't really sleeping, just to get as much of that education from the real world as possible. And then I went to Starwood, and Starwood's actually, it was before Marriott acquired them.
Yeah. Were you there when Keith Ferrazzi was CMO?
I was there. Before Keith was CMO. I was there. It was Barry Sternlicht was actually still the CEO.
Oh, nice.
Joined. Yeah. So a really amazing time, and coming off of, Barry just very much was about brand and understanding that it's not just like, hey, you're putting like heads in beds, but like, what's this experience that you're creating? And how do you think about it from before someone ever shows up to when they're on site, to how you're building that relationship? And a big thing with Starwood was their SPG program and that loyalty programming. And we'd actually build out our own CRM before CRM was a thing, right? Like, so just really amazing from that deep brand experience and understanding like how the brand actually is kind of the bloodline of the company and how it informs not just, that experience beforehand, but across all of the touch points and throughout. And so that was really formative for me in terms of just how I thought about and approached things, even when I got to these other worlds. So I went to Google. It was an amazing time to be at Google. It was when they'd acquired YouTube. They just started building out the Google Content Network. We were moving into more of the brand space, and travel was a very large vertical. And so I came over and was in an interesting role there before heading up the B2B brand. And so that was really where I was able to start understanding like, okay, here's this pace and this speed and like how, again, companies that are growing incredibly fast and are incredibly innovative, but also while bringing in more of like what I'd learned and kind of like grown up doing and the brand side of things. So those were very formative experiences before the HubSpots of the world.
Very cool. All right, so let's hop into empathy. So we talked a little bit about, supporting families through emotional, logistical burdens of loss and grief and legacy planning. So for those that aren't familiar with empathy, tell us a little bit about how you guys do that and what's the business model? How do you monetize? How do you support these families with products and things that can make their life easier during this really intense moment, as we alluded to in your bio?
Yeah. So I think with empathy, obviously, like we have deep roots in loss, and deep being the 6 years that we've been here. But our bigger brand purpose is, how can we build a more resilient society one hard moment at a time? And so basically really help tackle, as you mentioned earlier, any of those really emotionally charged moments, but that are often really logistically hard, right? So if you think of, on the loss side, having to deal with the estate settlement and closing out all the accounts and, going through that whole process can take a few years. As we've gotten into some other spaces, whether it's, support for a leave of absence or caregiving support, right? Like those also have a ton of emotion built into it, but also have a lot of that like administrative burden and overhead. And what we've really learned and what we've really built in and leaned into from our expertise is being able to tackle both sides of that problem. And we do that with a combination of like technology and human care. So it's interesting because empathy, from our earliest days actually was really leaning into AI. And it's funny, I was talking with someone about this last week where, over 5 years ago, we actually had, we were using AI to let people write obituaries. And at the time, people were like, no one would ever let someone write an obituary with AI. How could you? Now it's like, yeah, of course. But we've always had that built into what we do. But at the same time, we augment that with a human in the loop to make sure that, again, you're dealing with people in very vulnerable, very sensitive moments. And as someone is actually, even if they're just trying to figure out, okay, how do I get through this list of all the things I need to do? Sometimes just being able to talk to somebody to actually go through those steps is really important to helping them move forward. And so in terms of how we actually reach those people in those times of need, empathy sells through primarily insurance carriers. So we work with the largest life insurance companies, 9 of the top 10 in the US. We work with the largest in the UK and also in Canada, as well as some financial institutions. And then we also work with some companies as, through their HR benefits teams, right? So again, you're an employee and you get access to empathy. So for us, though, it's really a matter of, making sure that we're finding different ways to be there for people when they are in these moments and they actually need this support.
Interesting. So you guys work mainly with life insurance policyholders as essentially like something that they would give their client base as a resource if and when they are making a claim against their policy. Is that kind of the entryway into the product that most consumers get to become aware of you guys?
Yeah, and it froze for a minute. So if I freeze, just like let me know.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I heard it go quiet for a second, but
Yeah.
hopefully you heard me.
No, I think I got the gist of it. Yeah. So we
Cool.
actually work with life insurance carriers in a few ways. One is at that point of claim. So again, someone is a policyholder, they pass away. Let's say that they have MetLife or New York Life or Prudential, then their family member calls into, or that company calls the family member for the claim. And in that moment, the life insurance carrier is also able to offer empathy to that person. And then that beneficiary is able to have access to empathy for a couple of years, right? Because again, we know that process, the actual just like administrative and logistical process can take years. And then of course with grief, that timeline's its own thing. So that's one way that we work with life insurance carriers. The other way that we work with the carriers is actually, more at their point of sale. And so for instance, some of our insurance carriers, when they're selling a policy, can actually like offer empathy as part of that policy. And then, whether it's the agent working, oftentimes the agent or the advisor working with that policyholder, they can then immediately say, hey, do you want to do your estate planning? Do you want to do your legacy planning? And by the way, you also have access to, caregiving. So again, for the policyholder, it means that the life insurance policy is actually also about helping them through their life, not just being a benefit at death.
Interesting. So it's
Yeah.
kind of more of a holistic experience to long-term care planning or kind of end-of-life care planning, but not just, the same reason why most of us go to get our life insurance. We're just thinking about, making sure that our family is taken care of financially. But what you're showing is that there's just this whole other complex, web of things to deal with other than just, getting paid out a benefit, which is, something that a lot of people can use help with, and technology is making easier now through products like BetterUp,
Yeah.
through empathy.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's really interesting is, over the past year, we've been leaning into doing a lot of research. And, for the past 5 years, we've been doing this study called the grief tax to understand the emotional, the physical, the financial tolls that loss and grief in these hard moments, take on the individual and our users. What we also have been doing, though, is looking at we did a study this year on the great wealth transfer. So there's this huge conversation happening in the financial industry. It goes not just across banks, but also into life insurance, which is that there's $124 trillion about to change hands over the next couple of decades, right?
That's essentially the boomers entering retirement and end of life planning themselves.
Yes, exactly. The interesting thing is everyone just uses this big, $124 trillion number. But the fact is, what we found in our research is when you're looking at, the needs that are popping up with caregiving, and the fact that you have over 60 million people who are moving into caregiving needs or caregiver roles, right? As well as people, mortgages are more expensive. Everything's more expensive for folks right now. And so I think it's one of those things where what's assumed to be money that'll be there is actually potentially getting chipped away. And so
Interesting.
and what we can see in part of why we actually even went into the legacy planning and the estate planning is because, in addition to seeing that when people don't have those affairs in order, how much just heartache and hassle and all of that it causes for people, but it's also just the expense and the leakage that happens, right? And so when you have around 70% of people don't have a will in place, it's one of those things where it's happening so often. And we're like, if you can get ahead of it, it's almost like a preventative way of actually protecting that money for your family down the line too.
Yeah. How much are you guys thinking about kind of, I think death is one of those things where it's so taboo. We just don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to acknowledge that it exists. But I think I've experienced it in my own family, mainly through my in-laws. But I've seen it in my family. And when people die, generally there is, hurt feelings and frustration, and which a lot of times ends up in legal situations, which then ends up burning up parts of the estate over siblings who are kind of fighting over things. it feels like if some of these things were addressed in a more transparent, open way where people kind of knew what to expect and they had worked on their issues before they waited for this critical buildup in this moment, that there wouldn't be these fights to lead to, that lead to, at best case, hurt feelings, at worst case, actually diluting the estate because of legal battles. I wonder if you guys think about much of, that in kind of your history with, BetterUp, and kind of thinking about tools that help people with like resources to deal with mental health. Do you think about that as part of, where you guys might roadmap, or how important that is, that issue to families, or how often do you see it pop up?
The answer is yes, 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 all the time, and yes. Here's what I would say. So on the actual getting the affairs in order, it's so interesting because, again, when we were doing our research around the Great Wealth Transfer, it was like 57% of people said that they just couldn't even deal with talking about it because they felt overwhelmed or it was too emotional, and that leads to, okay, planning doesn't happen. And then you have those fights, you have those legal battles, you have family fissures. And so what we actually have done with when we talk about estate planning, it's not just, okay, here's how you can create a will, but we've actually built into that, how you can create your will and trust, how you can actually do get like all of your affairs in order. So it's your health directives and some of the stuff people really don't want to talk about or think about, but it's like putting that all kind of in one place as one conversation. We actually use AI to do like conversational coaching on how to have those conversations. So again, we've worked with incredible grief experts, as well as legal experts, as well as mental health experts. All of that is kind of fueling our experience as well. But basically with that, and also seeing, hey, these are how, what we know from a conversational piece, like that can help people move forward. We actually give it so that you could say, as Dylan, okay, I need to talk to my mom about actually getting her affairs in order. I don't even know where to start. And then we will guide you through how to have that conversation and practice that with you so that you can actually have those conversations as well. Also, there's a lot of like emotional and almost like stuff that might not have like a lot of like financial value, but that has a lot of that familial value. And we give people the opportunity to also capture that, log that, like include that as part of their life vault experience so that it's all actually like taken care of, like preventatively and ahead of all of those things that happen.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, and again, we just kept seeing when we had built out our loss support experience, we kept seeing how people, it was basically trying to catch up and like, deal with like all of that stuff because those plans hadn't been put in place. And we're like, okay, that's a huge opportunity where we can really help people. And part of helping them move forward is helping them prepare. And so that's part of what we're doing on that side. Now, when it comes to the actual, like, what does it mean for mental health and like all that whole piece of it? And this goes for, again, not just when people are in fighting over, the estate, but just in general, going through grief and going through loss. I mean, when we did our last grief tax, we saw it was incredible. Like 90% of people would have anxiety like panic attacks, right? Like people aren't sleeping. People aren't, people are literally getting ill, like physically sick. So like truly for us, we think about that very deeply. Again, we work with like David Kessler, who's one of the world's most renowned grief experts on helping people actually like process their grief and move through it, who's actually worked with us on creating, content around that's within our actual product experience, as well as like just sort of, putting that content out in the world to say like, hey, even if you don't have access to empathy, here's how we can help you move forward. We also have, just different self-guided tools, whether that's meditation or journaling or just daily, regular check-ins so that someone can sort of check in. And of course, managers, if people are, if they're calling someone at 2 a.m, we then can say like, hey, can we give you like an off ramp to actual like our care managers aren't grief counselors. They're not therapists, but what they are able to do is triage.
Yeah, to support people who have been through, this a million times with customers, and they have resources and people that they can point them to. Or
exactly.
Awesome. All right. I want to derail slightly just for a moment, but you mentioned in your bio, you went to business school because that was the thing you did at the time.
Yeah.
I'm curious, are you still an advocate for business school? Do you think it plays a role in the current ecosystem of how fast the world is changing with AI? Would you recommend to a young person that they go to business school? Does it depend on whether a company's paying for it or whether it comes out of your pocket? Just be curious of your, current take on business school.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's so interesting because I've had this conversation a number of times. I really think, and I know I was kind of kidding, like, oh, you did it. But it was for an engineer, trust me, like no marketing company, like no marketing role was opening up, to be honest. But also at the same time, it's just, I do think, at least for me, it was an opportunity to get exposure to, a new network of people. And I think from that perspective, so much of it came from the, and I went to a business school that's known for, collaborative work and different working styles. And so for me, part of it was like getting into different working styles and also just sort of building that network. I always think that there is value in that. And especially as you get further and further along in your career, and especially with AI right now, how people are getting jobs and roles isn't necessarily like, of course you can still apply, but like sometimes as you get further and further along, it's based on your network that you've built and the people that you know and introductions that can be made. Now, that said, I think for people considering business school, it really just, and this is always the worst answer, but it depends. And it's really like, why? Like, is it because you think you need to go to check a box? That I would argue is probably not necessarily the case these days. If it's because, there is something specific that you're really looking for, trying to get out of it, I think, and if your company's going to pay for it, then that's great, right? Like it never hurts to like go in with like, a learning mindset and also just sort of stretch yourself and see other areas. But I really think it just depends on the situation. I do think though, from a marketing career perspective, what's really interesting and with everything that we're seeing and, everybody and their brother has talked about this much more eloquently and intelligently than I have on AI. But the fact is, that model of, hey, how do I grow in my career? I'm managing more budget. I'm managing more people. I'm like, that's not actually what's going to help someone grow in their career now, right? This is at least my perspective. It's, how are you getting the most leverage out of what you're creating? And like, again, I think I've actually talked with certain folks that I've mentored where it's, you may be the most incredible individual contributor for the rest of your life. And if you're able to show the impact and if you're able to show like outcomes that you're driving and you're able to use technology to do that and lead through influence, my hunch is that person will have a potentially like astronomical career trajectory that possibly wasn't available to them a few years ago.
Wow.
And I think, again, it's one of those things where people are building teams of agents. So it's a very different, scenario than, I have to build a 200-person team.
Yeah, it's how do I use technology to replicate a lot of those things now? Yeah, no, I think I think the human aspect is actually super important, being in an environment where you can learn and have critical thinking, collaborate with classmates and go back into the context of business, and also that investing in your network, I think, that's probably more important than ever, as you alluded to as well. So thanks for your update there. All right, so let's get into the idea of marketing sensitive or taboo topics. I know we've touched on it so far, but at Empathy, you're marketing around grief, loss, and the life planning, topics that people instinctively avoid, as we've mentioned. How do you design brand campaigns that feel supportive and human rather than maybe intrusive or clinical?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because for us, and this actually was true, at HubSpot, weirdly, and true at BetterUp, and it's true here, which is all three are category creators, right? So we all, like when you think about HubSpot, like HubSpot invented inbound marketing. We wrote the book on inbound marketing. It was like creating a movement around inbound marketing. At BetterUp, we were doing the same thing with mental fitness and just how, basically investing in human transformation and mental fitness can lead to actual performance. And now here at Empathy, we're basically saying, we are like this, it's almost like a human resilience platform, right? Where it's like when you help people through these hard moments, what this leads to. All that's to say, when you are a category creator, building your brand and doing brand building campaigns is not just about your brand, but it's actually about building the category. And so in all
Mm.
these instances, it was how are we actually educating the market? How are we actually, providing value even before someone's giving us a dollar? How are we actually, again, like potentially fueling a movement and helping people realize this is bigger for us at Empathy? This is very true. It's bigger than us as a company. Again, whether particularly with loss is the most universal thing in the world, right? Like everyone will experience loss. And so for us, it's like, okay, well, there was no universal solution. We've put an amazing product in place, but also like ultimately we just want more people out there talking about and understanding that there should be a better standard of support and that there should be conversations. And, in the workplace, when you think about the average bereavement leave is like 3, maybe 5 days. And that's if you lost like
Wow.
a spouse, a child, like a parent, like someone like really close to you. And that's not even taking into account the people who like a lot of people who lose their pets and it's like losing a kid. A lot of people who are losing, a really great friend that is a family member to them, but it's not in the HR system that way, right? And so I think for us, we just see, just educating the market that this is really a need, and making it about the bigger conversation, something that's really important from the brand building perspective. I also think for us, it's one of those where, particularly at BetterUp and at Empathy, we are in this B2B2C model. So typically when we're marketing, we are ultimately like marketing into buyers, but we also want to create cultural conversation that reaches, again, especially with Empathy, it's universal. So we want to make sure that we're helping people at large understand that like, it's okay. This is a shared human experience. Like, and it's okay if you have a different process of how you go through it. And by the way, we all have a need to do legacy planning. And even if you're like, well, I'm not some rich and famous person, like every person has a legacy, right? And so for us, it's really helping people breaking down, taking the taboo topics and making them less taboo so that it just like moves the culture forward too.
Empathy launched public activations like What Grows Here in Grand Central Terminal to bring legacy planning into everyday conversations. What goes into designing experiential campaigns that can break down some of those same societal taboos? I think about campaigns that, that where they would show how many people died of lung cancer, back in the day when they were still trying to market, how bad cigarettes were for you. And sometimes when, you can be kind of stopped in the real world with
Yeah.
a visual, it can
Yeah.
kind of like bring things home in a way that is more impactful than maybe like, seeing a banner ad or something like that. So I'd be curious how you're thinking about using experiential in interesting ways.
Yeah, and we did. We actually just had our pop-up experience, and it was called What Grows Here. It was a part of our Legacies Live On, Own Yours, Honor Theirs campaign. And as part of it, the idea of What Grows Here was basically creating almost like this living art installation where people could come and they could write a note where they were either, whether it could be anything from just the name of someone whose legacy you admire or the name of someone you lost, or a note to them or a note to yourself, or just, in general, and putting it into this field. And we basically created like a live, like, garden in the middle of Grand Central, which again, you have the contrast of this incredible, gorgeous stone, like limestone, and then you have this entire green space that just it's a real welcome and an invitation to take a pause and to take a moment and to reflect. And I think for us, obviously part of it's about getting the name Empathy out there, and we also have we have a great brand name, but sometimes it's helping people understand what empathy actually is.
Yeah, making the connection.
But it's also, it was really amazing because I think like that type of experience, and again, we're not standing there saying, hey, if you scan our QR code, we'll let you write a note, right? Like we're in a space where that's not how it works. It's like literally you're asking someone, you're just giving people, inviting them to like just have a real moment. And I think when you
can't feel transactional.
Exactly, and you don't want it to. And I think like for us, it wasn't like we were accepting their emails as they were walking out. Because again, I think we had people who at the same time though would be so moved by it. They were like, wow, I didn't, we had people who were crying and were like, I needed this and I didn't even realize it. And like, thank you so much. And then they're like, I want to know about empathy. Right. And I think it's something where when the experience is compelling enough, and again, I think also having like handwritten notes, which is taking it from the digital world really into, that tangible, like you can feel it, to then like just this idea that people can see that they are a part of a community and they're not alone. And again, it's a shared experience and like, it's okay. And this should be part of our cultural conversation. So I think for us, it's really important that we do, I know I was joking about the transactional, but having those kind of like those guiding principles and making sure that we're bringing the brand to life in like a really true and meaningful way. And when we make that investment for that type of activation, it's really about how are we just giving something to this community, right? And giving them and inviting them to participate. Now, again, when we do things at industry events, it's different. And I think but even then, it's like, hey, we don't want to just show up with like the standard, booth with the pull-up backdrop. And we all have had to do that at some point. But it's like, how are we actually creating experiences or ways for people to connect? Because and ultimately like foster conversation. And we've actually been doing that. This year, we also held a few events called Unbound, which basically were smaller executive summits where we brought together these leaders in an industry where like sometimes they'll get together, but like not in an intimate setting. And it was just sort of a pick your head up from the day to day and really like, again, sharing insights and research. And we had Nick Thompson from The Atlantic come and like actually talk about like what's going on with AI and that, because we know in our space, it's so important, and bringing in like kind of that education perspective.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's the key to winning right now. Experiential is just adding tremendous value and making it feel less corporate in ways.
Yeah.
Because, there's just so many opportunities that are pulling key execs in different directions that their expectation levels have been raised, and for good measure, I think. So,
well, and I think on that, right? Like, so I think for empathy, and this was similar at BetterUp, like ultimately our buyer, it's a relatively small universe. And when you think about it, it's like, how are you giving people access to something that they can't buy, right? And again, it's like, how are you giving them access to experiences? How are you giving them the opportunity to step out of actually their office, but in a way that's really compelling and to actually experience interactions with people that maybe, again, it's one thing to just take people to a sports event. It's another for someone to be able to go on a hike with Maria Sharapova, right? And we would do those kinds of things. And I think, it's really just thinking of like, okay, what do these people care about? What's compelling to them and interacting in that way. And I think you're to the point on, how AI is affecting marketing. I do think experiential just becomes so much more important, and looking at when do you have those real moments of human connection? When do you have moments of real human dialogue? Because ultimately, the tooling can do so much, and it does, trust me, for our team, and it also does so much, right? And I think, but ultimately when it's like, hey, you want to have really that high touch moment, there is something about that in person. And I think it's also, for marketing, when I was at HubSpot, my team was actually the team that grew our inbound event before they rebranded to basically, to over 20,000 people in person, right? And I can tell you, it was around 2,500 to over almost 25,000 people. And then we had like 100,000 on the live stream. And when you do that and you have these people in the room, there's just like, and again, it's about like energy, and it's that having that collective energy and people realizing that they're part of something bigger than them. And, majority of those people weren't necessarily HubSpot customers at the time, but like when the time came that they could buy or were looking at buying, like it was definitely something that put it on the map for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. It became much bigger than a user conference. There were obviously moments for the brand to talk about functionality and, how the platform is working. But really it became, like something like a TEDx event, like where you were going to go and hear from people who were inspirational and would get you fired up for, the work to be done the next week and have insightful conversations. So you would have that memorable association with HubSpot that, hey, like HubSpot isn't just a tool that I use every day. It's a community, it's a movement, it's a feeling. It's something that I want to be involved in, and it makes the product that much more sticky and harder to leave.
Yeah. And I think like, again, whether it's marketing or in these taboo areas, it's how are you creating a brand that people like know, love, and want to be a part of, is how I think about it. And it's ultimately really around, and even when you're selling B2B, B2B to C, B2C, it's ultimately they're people, right? And it's like, how are you actually paying attention to when you're talking to these different audiences, what matters to them, what do they care about, and how do you help them feel like they're part of something bigger that they belong to?
You alluded to the idea that you needed to go to B school because you were an engineer, and that there wasn't, opportunities for engineers to hop into the marketing world. But having been someone who started their education in biomedical and mechanical engineering before you transitioned to marketing leadership, how does an engineering and systems-driven background influence how you structure creative marketing engines?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like from an engineering as well as a marketing perspective, both are, when done really well, are problem solving. Both are, balancing creativity and experimenting and trying things, with also looking for patterns and repeatable patterns. And where can you, basically see what's working and keep building on it. And so I think just, it is that left brain, right brain idea that comes across in both, right? And I think that was part of, like, for me, at least, I bring both of those to the table. And, I think from a marketing perspective, people talk about it being art and science. I would argue engineering is actually art and science as well.
Mm. During your time as CMO of BetterUp, the focus was on mental fitness and human potential. How do you quantify and measure brand equity when your core product outcome is emotional or psychological well-being?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we would look at, the general, like, okay, what's going on with the basic metrics around like awareness and engagement, and how our audience is growing, and all of those things. But then also for us, it's really looking at, okay, what is happening with the actual usage and utilization and activation and advocacy. And I think for us, it's one thing, you can create something that a lot of people get really excited about, and they want to go to your website and they want to learn. But if they're not using the product, then it's, especially for a company like BetterUp, then it's not doing what you need it to do. And so I think for us, we're very plugged in with like the product team to make sure that we were also seeing those types of activation and utilization metrics. And like ultimately, that's people experiencing it are then living the brand.
Interesting. Yeah. So a lot of the usage and some of the things that we would normally look at from any other type of product measurement of the health of the brand still stays consistent.
Yeah.
In a performance marketing world driven by automated algorithms, how do you maintain deep emotional resonance and sensitivity in paid acquisition campaigns?
Yeah, so I think for us, like at Empathy, our paid acquisition campaigns are primarily focused on the buyer, right? And so again, the buyer being a product person, a distribution person, someone at the life insurance carrier. I think ultimately as a brand, we have to show up consistently and make sure that we have, our brand identity and tone is there, but the ultimate like value proposition and what you're actually, again, marketing to them is different than how if we were to be marketing to the end user, right, who's going through that moment. So for us, we actually don't do paid acquisition campaigns to try to acquire, members, users, because they're coming through, our distribution is actually through the life insurance carriers.
Yeah, it'd be like boiling the ocean to,
yes, exactly.
to try to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. So again, I think for us, it's helping just culture and society get more comfortable with the idea that, like, hey, it's okay if you need support, or it's okay if, if you're grieving and it's taking, or you feel like it's just going on forever and ever. Like that's more, when we think about how we're marketing to them, but we aren't paying to acquire those, to acquire users. When we are doing paid campaigns to our buyers, it really is about those value propositions and making sure that it's clear to them that they understand, for whatever type of ecosystem they're working in, that there's actually, this is how empathy can help with like the things that matter to them. So again, for insurance carriers, that can sometimes be persistency. Like, will people actually stay on life insurance for a couple of years? That can be generational loyalty. So again, when someone gets as a beneficiary, maybe never had heard of carrier XYZ, they get access to empathy through that carrier XYZ, and then that carrier has actually given them something that's valuable that we can actually say, hey, this leads to greater loyalty of those next generation, or again, like increase in sales. So for those life insurance agents, being able to go out and say, hey, you as a policyholder, you can start your estate planning. You can have access to caregiving support. You can have access if you need to go on a leave of absence from work. Like all this is available to you just for signing up with us. So those are the types of metrics and the things that we think about. Ultimately, it's getting to, and again, just looking at different points and where people are in the funnel, right? I think the other thing for us is, just making sure that, to your point, even when we're doing those messages, that we are keeping in mind like why we're doing this, and that we are keeping in mind from a tone perspective that it's not just completely, and we talked to our carriers about this. It's about helping people move from transactions to relationships. And so for us, even as we think about it, just making sure even in that marketing that we're not being like crazy transactional. So.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Marketers face relentless pressure to prioritize short-term conversions over long-term brand equity. How do you pitch brand storytelling and community initiatives to the board and the other C levels within your committee who demand who are looking for ROI?
Well, so the amazing thing is the other C levels, and I would even say sometimes our board, it's like pitching me on ideas of like, wait, here's what we do cultural. And I think that's the thing, right? Is when you're working with a company like Empathy, where what we are trying to do is, obviously there's the commercial side of it, but it is about culture, and it is about how you're creating these different conversations and shifting norms. There is just kind of an understanding that this mission and the movement are bigger than the company. And so I think the important thing is it's not, one or the other. It's how are you actually able to do both? How do you think about balancing both for the business at certain points in times? What are you actually investing? I'm making this up, 70% of your time, money, and energy towards versus 20% versus 10%. What's that mix look like at any point in time? And I think as long as you're able to actually prove out, hey, this is why at this point in the, for the business, this is what we're doing, and how we actually see, when we're doing a brand campaign, how we think about that is just being really like, seeds for demand down the road, right? That ultimately you're able to have those conversations. But I think, again, if I were to just roll into the board and be like, we want to do all of these brand things and good luck sales, like that's not how it works, right? Like for, when we're in those conversations, it's very much, and by the way, here's also having the real mastery and the understanding of all the metrics and what we're doing on the other side as well.
When your company mission deals with heavy topics like mental health or bereavement, is anything needed to protect team culture and keep their creative marketing team inspired or energized? Or is it the mission, like you said, that allows them to kind of rise above these heavier topics?
I mean, I think the mission does help in a major way. And I think the mission, again, ultimately the mission isn't about, okay, so people have loss. The mission is about how do you help people move forward? How do you help people become more resilient? Like ultimately it's about, how are you actually, or a BetterUp, it was helping people reach their potential. Like those are, there's an optimism there and a positive end state that you're helping people get to, or positive along the way at some point. And I think that's one part of it. I do think the other piece of it though is, and I think this matters whether you're working in something that's really mission driven or is less mission driven, but it's just like, how have you actually outlined what is the actual vision for your team? And like, what is the mission even within the marketing organization? And what is it that you're setting out to do? And I think part of it's also just like, how do you foster that culture of like, getting people together who just really want to be amazing at what they do. Right. And I think like part of it's also just when you think about hiring and talent density and bringing the right type of people together. And then if you have a compelling vision for what that team is trying to achieve, and then you ladder that up to like an amazing mission, that just keeps people inspired all day.
Looking ahead, how do you see tech, AI, and brand storytelling evolving to better support human beings through life's hardest transitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think storytelling is obviously a natural part of it, where it's people hearing other people's stories, people understanding, again, that they're not in it alone, people understanding that it looks different for everybody, right? So I think on the AI side, part of what that makes possible is just all of these different permutations. And even though you're able to build amazing experiences based on having that, the insights and like expertise when you're working with experts and pulling that all together, it just is able to make those differences in the availability of different experiences scalable at a way that it wouldn't have been before if it was like, check a box and let's try to put you down a specific path, right? And I think even from the marketing perspective, for us, it really, from a creative production and our ability to test and iterate, really it's just like, made those cycle times shrink in such a great way, but also provided, just like generative thinking and ways to get people, sometimes it's giving people a first thing to start with, and then they can run with it. And so I think, from that perspective, ultimately it's just understanding like, where is the power of each for your team, right? And again, if it's, hey, we can use AI to get better insights and understanding and scale, that's amazing. But also if we know, here's where, again, we're not going to use AI to make up like what should be a really genuine, true human story, right? In terms of like explaining, here's someone's actual experience with caregiving. Because I think as a company for us, that just kind of is at odds with the authentic nature of what we're actually trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. All right, Cindy. Well, this was an amazing conversation. So cool what technology is building and all the areas that we maybe even consider too taboo for a business model to thrive is changing. So love what you guys are building at Empathy. If folks want to continue and follow along as you continue to build out the marketing org and the story of Empathy, bringing it to the market, where would you like to send people to stay in touch with you or to learn more?
Yeah, so they can stay in touch with me on LinkedIn, Cindy L. Goodrich on LinkedIn. And in terms of Empathy, obviously just following Empathy on LinkedIn or on Instagram.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for spending a little bit of time with us this morning and cueing us into some of these awesome things that you guys are doing while you build out the brand storytelling and Empathy. So thanks for spending some time with the audience today. If those of you who are watching, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or subscribe if you want to hear from more amazing CMOs like Cindy in the future. And if you're listening to the show, an honest review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening on is how we find a larger audience. So don't forget to do that. And last but not least, if there's maybe a tech marketer out there, or maybe an engineer who's ready for a career pivot, or maybe someone who's thinking about going back to grad school, or just somebody who you think would enjoy the conversation I had with Cindy today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I will wish you all a great week. Thanks for coming on, Cindy.